Can we see the participants coming? Yes. Very good. Okay. Welcome all to our webinar about Ukrainian energy sector, which we called Ukrainian Energy Sector in Transition, Opportunities for Norwegian-Ukrainian Cooperation. And we in NUCC, Ukrainian-Norwegian Chamber of Commerce, are very happy for this webinar to finally happen, because we have started planning this in early January as an offline seminar in Oslo. We were expecting Asters to come, but unfortunately, due to the travel restrictions, we are here at the digital room. But in that way, we can also say that we reach more people. We have almost 70 people registered to participate in this seminar, which shows that there is a great interest to this topic. And I feel personally like Ukrainian energy sector is something that is in constant transition, and it is therefore we need such seminars from time to time to understand where Ukraine is moving, which steps are done, and what to expect in the future. And I should say that it is not an easy task to navigate in Ukrainian legislation, and therefore we have today with us our long-time member and partners for this event, Asters Law, who has a broad portfolio in Ukraine, both within petroleum and renewables, and a number of Norwegian companies are among their customers. At the same time, to find the best solutions to capitalize on the opportunities, we also need experts in Norwegian market and those who know the local laws. And therefore, we have today with us representatives of law firm Schjødt, which is leading Scandinavian full-service business law firm with almost 250 lawyers, if I'm not mistaken, with lots of experience and impressive portfolio. Anyway, I'm not going to steal a lot of time for the information that you can find on the internet, and we will also ask our speakers to share the presentation so we can send it for those who registered for the webinar. But since we saw many new stakeholders attending this seminar, I thought that it would be fair to introduce our Chamber of Commerce with a couple of words. We were established 12 years ago by 8 members. Now our family consists of more than 140 companies, both Norwegian and Ukrainian. And our main task is obviously to assist our members, but also to create arenas for developing trade and investments between the countries. I can show you some recent trade numbers. And with that is said, we are very optimistic about the trends that we see in our trade balance between Ukraine and Norway, and especially the last year was very positive due to the large investments from Norwegian side to Ukrainian renewable energy sector. Though the trade of goods was only 6.5% growth last year. We see that this year, even despite the pandemic, the trade balance is going up, and already the first 7 months show 18% growth, which is very positive. This is mostly due to the increase of import from Norway of the seafood, but we also see new goods coming from Ukraine, like boats, industrial machines, and model houses, which is very positive. The same goes to the trade of services due to the increase of IT services export from Ukraine to Norway. This is just to illustrate that there is that our trade is getting more diverse, and there are opportunities. But what we in NUCC are 100% sure is that there is still potential, undiscovered potential to increase cooperation within energy sector, both when it comes to investments, but also for trade of goods and services, especially within oil and gas sector, where we do not see that much cooperation as of today. But this is something that we together should focus on, and to find where the bridges can be built. And here I would like to give the floor to our first speaker today, Christian Fredrik Michelet, about the transfer of oil and gas assets, commercial and governmental perspectives. Christian, this digital floor is yours.
Thank you, and hello to all participants whom I cannot see, but thank you for this opportunity to speak about then the transfer of oil and gas assets, commercial and governmental perspectives. This I will address the Norwegian situation, transfer of licenses in the Norwegian oil and gas industry, and Ukraine has a slightly different system when it comes to the regulatory system for oil and gas activities. But the oil and gas business is an international business, and although various countries have some different regulatory systems, the fundamentals are the same. So I believe that that the experiences from Norway are relevant for Ukraine and vice versa. From the Norwegian side, the starting point for Norway, as for most countries in the world, is that the state owns the petroleum resources in the ground, both onshore and offshore. And the main sort of starting point for Norway, as for most countries, is that the state, although being an owner, doesn't explore and produce the petroleum. You need the technical and financial resources of companies. So it is the sort of the starting point is that Norway uses commercial companies to explore for and produce the petroleum resources. In Norway, we have a so-called concession system. So the state gives licenses to oil company joint ventures, a group of oil companies that form a joint venture and have an operating company. And the government take, the state revenues, are sort of based on two main pillars. Firstly, tax. So we have a special petroleum tax in Norway on profits of 56%, and in addition the general corporate tax of 22%, giving a tax rate for oil and gas activities of 78%, which is, of course, very high. I have a few words about that afterwards. The other sort of participation by the state is firstly that the state has a direct financial interest in all licenses. So the state could have 20% or 30% interest in a license, and there is a special management company for this state direct financial interest called Petoro. And finally, the state has a shareholding in the large Norwegian oil company Equinor of 67%. This brings the state interest up to, all in all, up to approximately 90% of all activities in the petroleum sector, which is very high, of course. With regard to companies, the main requirement is that they have sufficient technical competence and financial capacity. And both, you will not get a license as an oil company if you cannot demonstrate this. And if you want to have to buy and have transferred a license interest, you need also to demonstrate that you have technical competence and financial capacity, because those are the two main criteria for oil companies. The interest of the government is, of course, that the commercial companies are themselves interested and actively pursuing exploration and production. You don't want companies that hold licenses but do nothing. So that's why Norway is encouraging transfers of licenses They want at all times the most interested companies to hold the licenses. And if a company is not interested in a license and want to prioritize otherwise, then that company should be able to transfer its license interest. Since we have this tax system in Norway, very high tax, normally if you sell an asset, you would be taxed on the capital gain on that transfer. We had that system up into the 80s, but effectively it stopped all license transfers. So we got a special Norwegian tax system, which is that you are not paying capital gain tax on a transfer of a license interest. You just transfer the tax position from the seller to the buyer. In that way, the tax effect for the state is neutral. So that is a main issue in Norway in order to promote license transfers. The main government policies then in this sector, and you see all the offshore blocks on the map to the right, is that Norway holds regular license rounds. It wants to have a stable fiscal regime. So we have had 78% tax since the end of the 1970s. But in two stages, some incentives have been introduced. Firstly, in 2005, in order to promote more exploration, the state gives an annual cash refund of the tax value of the losses attributable to exploration costs. So instead of having a tax loss in a year, which you carry forward, you get that tax loss immediately paid out by the state. This was a very successful, proved to be a very successful incentive for exploration in Norway. The second incentive package we have seen is this year, back in June, in this oil price and COVID-19 crisis, where the industry got tax reliefs by in three main elements: advancement of tax deductions, cash refund of tax losses in 2020 and 2021. And these elements were in fact only meant to move time-wise the tax effects. So the intent is that this relief this year should in the long term be neutral on government take. That is a discussion whether that's the case or not, but generally it's quite neutral for the state, but you get tax reliefs the first years in order to get higher tax burdens later on. The next element is gas flaring prohibition with CO2 tax. You have to pay CO2 tax for the oil and gas business if you have CO2 emissions. And the final main development in Norway in policy is what we call electrification of the Norwegian continental shelf, where you now have hydropower, clean green power from shore, going in cables out to the platforms to replace the gas-driven generators, electricity generators on the platforms, and thereby you you reduce the gas emissions in Norway. But instead, you send that gas not used in Norway, you export to other countries. You export the CO2 problem. A main reason for this is the Paris Treaty, which requires national reductions of CO2 emissions. So this is an important element in the Norwegian policy of reducing gas emissions in CO2 emissions in Norway. From the company side, there has been, due to this transfer of licenses, a large changes in Norway during the last decade. We had the many oil majors, Exxon, Shell, many of them in Norway. And we have the European utility companies, previous Gas de France, etc. They have all exited now from Norway, and instead we have a new generation of companies having come in, many private equity-backed companies. There has been a significant interest in the Norwegian continental shelf in license applications and transfers up to this year. But now the question is, of course, what will be the effect, firstly, of the oil price and COVID-19 developments? And secondly, the capital moving to green sectors. You see a move, and we see it in Norway, less capital available for oil and gas activities. And the important elements here is firstly, of course, the European Green Deal by the new Commission with the EU taxonomy on sustainable investments, then classifying what are green investments, and oil and gas investments will certainly not be green. And now you see also oil company strategic moves towards green sectors. You see that on BP, Shell, Equinor, the large oil companies in Europe, not so much in US, they are moving over to green sectors. Now, what are the relevance of what I've said for Ukraine? Well, tax reliefs, etc., are a bit different since you have a system with production sharing agreements and you have bidding rounds, assuring, hopefully, competitiveness, which we will hear about in a minute. I still believe that the fundamentals of the Norwegian experiences are relevant for Ukraine and vice versa. So we'd very much like to discuss with you and share how our various experiences could be relevant for each other. And I think that we also promote the interest of the companies and the industrial players to understand both countries and seek activities in both countries. So that ends my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Christian. And I would like also to encourage our audience to ask questions or comment in the comment section or chat, which you find down below the screen. I should also say that we have prepared some polling for this webinar because we want to use your respected audience to find out your opinion about what you think is the main obstacles for increasing cooperation between Ukraine and Norway. And I would like to ask my colleague to, yes, the first one. You will have possibilities. Yeah, you have options to take between 1 or 2 answers, and these are lack of knowledge among Norwegian companies about Ukrainian energy market, unstable political situation in Ukraine, unclear or different legislation in Ukraine, lack of financial instruments to run business in Ukraine. So where do you see the main obstacles to increase cooperation between Ukraine and Norway within petroleum industry? And now while you are answering, you have 1 minute for that. I would like to give the floor to Armen Khachaturian, who will share with us information about what is happening with online licenses, auctions, and production sharing agreements for onshore and offshore blocks. And I'm especially curious to hear about the offshore development, because Ukraine have been talking about developing offshore in the Black Sea for quite some years. There were some steps forward and some steps back. So I'm curious to hear from you, Armen, whether it's going to happen in the nearest future, because we see that there is potential for Norway to be involved in Ukraine with technologies and competence that Norway has with the offshore. So we are looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Anatoly, very much. Indeed, Ukraine is struggling for its independence in the energy sector since the first year of its political independence in 1991, with different outcome, and still it is on the agenda to be self-sufficient and to be flexible in terms of the sources of Ukrainian gas and oil consumption. In this regard, the self-sufficiency is proved by geologists that Ukrainian deposits and the geological data available since Soviet time indicates that it's enough to produce on upstream schemes enough gas and oil to cover all the Ukrainian needs. However, it requires investment and it requires sufficient and proper legal regime. And today I would just touch upon the basics of two core available mechanisms in this area. One of them existed historically, that is a special permits that all investors, producers of oil and gas or any other natural deposit in Ukraine, I would just look at this in a little bit broader scope, would need to do this business. And historically, it was always on a competitive basis. However, it was held by Geological Authority of Ukraine subjectively, I would say, and so many individual special permits were issued without much substantiation. That was heavily criticized, especially in recent years when the fight against corruption was put as the national idea for the current government and for the previous government since Ukrainian Maidan. And the idea was to substitute it by a transparent system. It was introduced in October 2018 as electronic auction. The system, the platform was called Prozor. All procurement tenders in Ukraine today are done through Prozor, and Geological Service also is required to do it in this way. The idea of special permits or licenses is so that it is issued on a variety of terms. For example, it depends on the purpose, intended purpose of business. If it is limited to geological exploration, it is 5 years. If it is real production, 20 years. And for offshore Anatoly oil and gas fields, 30 years. So it's a quite lucrative term to get the special permit. As mentioned, it was introduced as a pilot project. Everything in Ukraine that is new requires some testing. And the tests turned out to be quite successful. Starting in 2020, 5 tenders were organized in this way for 47 blocks, and 27 special permits were already issued. And it brought to the state budget about 4 million euro, a little bit more than 4 million, which is considered as a success. And the further program of introducing this auctions is announced. Unfortunately, international investors do not turn their heads yet towards this forum. For example, in oil production, 24 blocks were selected by the Geological Service. 9 auctions were announced. However, there was no interest. And just 2 weeks ago, these 9 blocks were put on auction second time with 50% discount. So that may be considered as sort of a distressed asset in a way, given the difficulty with COVID and overall situation with the Ukrainian economy. And that was that may be considered as a lucrative opportunity for investors who do not want to spend much money but earn much more. In any event, talking about electronic auctions, this is an option. However, my personal preference would be to consider product sharing agreements. that exists as a form under Ukrainian law for quite a bit of time. And there were four, actually the law on project sharing agreements was adopted first time in 1999. It was amended several times. Again, unfortunately, there's no working PSA at the moment. However, there were four agreements signed at different times, and for certain reasons, they did not end up with real production, real kind of mechanism of putting life into the executed agreement. Nevertheless, this forum remains to be, from the legal standpoint, the most attractive vehicle for bringing foreign investor to this sector. Most recently, it was approved by the Cabinet of Ministers decision in late 2019 on selecting 12 large onshore blocks for PSA tenders. And the actual tenders were held in 2019. The winners of all these tenders included both Ukrainian companies and a combination of foreign investors from the US, Canada, for other blocks. You can see the names here on the slide. We were involved as a firm in many PSA developments, starting from the past. In one of the four agreements signed was with company Shell, another with Chevron, the world-renowned brands. One was heavily negotiated, but it did not come to the execution because it was in Crimea for the offshore block. The consortium led by ExxonMobil and Shell did a lot of work, but again, political developments, geopolitical developments prevented realization of that project. With the tenders of 2019, we were hired by the Ministry of Energy through USID, Tetra company, to advise in negotiation of the government with four out of these 9 projects. It is a painful procedure. It is still pending. Most recently, the Cabinet of Ministers extended the negotiation time, which is allowed by law, and 8 PSAs are still awaiting the execution. We hope it will be done soon. Anatoli's question about offshore is also pulsing, because never, despite of the occupation of Crimea, Ukraine still have a very large offshore area under its control, which is very promising from the geological point of view. And one of them was put for tender. It's called Dolphin Block last year. Competition was quite aggressive, especially among 2 US companies. Again, most of the investors, and it was in media, of these companies were from Eastern Europe or from Russia or from Ukraine. And that was a little bit questionable in the end of the process. So the government decided to cancel the tender because of these political issues and challenges. And this Dolphin Block, which under geological information is absolutely promising and a very lucrative investment site, is now under consideration of the government again for a new tender. We hope that by the end of this year, it will be formalized and there's an opportunity to participate for experienced investors, especially with all this historic experience and knowledge by Norwegian companies. That may be definitely of interest. Very briefly, why we are talking about PSA. PSA is known in the world. In Ukraine, there's a special legislation on that. And why it is lucrative? Because First of all, it provides out-of-parties investors with opportunities to be alone as a specific company or form consortiums. If there are several co-bidders or co-investors, one of them would be appointed as an operator representing the consortium in relations with the government. The government is represented by the cabinet of ministers, and this highest executive authority. So it's not the ministry or any agency, but it is the government itself. That gives a bigger leverage of influence on all the procedures and the backup from the governmental side. The term of the agreement is up to 50 years, which may be extended on the request of the investor upon expiration of this term. It is a large part of time that gives additional opportunities and long-term strategy. Production sharing is based on sharing the eventual product. If we talk about hydrocarbons, it would be gas and oil. If it is mineral ore, it would be ore. And the distribution is at the distribution point. First, investor will cover its cost, receiving cost recovery production, which under the law is defined as up to 70% of the total produce, and a part of the profit production. This is what is going on the top of that. The PSAs may be concluded based on the tender and without tender. The tender procedure is standard for most of the projects that happen in Ukraine to date. However, there were a couple of no tender procedure, and under the law it is possible for pool deposits or for already licensed deposits. If a company, either Ukrainian or foreign, has license received otherwise, it may petition the government with a request to convert this license into the PSA. And that is also an opportunity to form consortiums with the license holders, either historic in Ukraine or those who won it in a transparent e-auctions that we spoke in the beginning of this presentation, and do it in a PSA manner, which, as we are now discussing, has much more attractive features. The winning criteria for the winner of the tender would be the work program that is proposed, which must be most efficient with most modern technology and the large amount of investment. Environmental safety, attractiveness of investment terms in all other respects, and sufficient financial security and relevant international experience. The parent company, normally the investors would go through a SPA, a special purpose SPV, I'm sorry, and the parent company would place its financial guarantee or the bank guarantee or otherwise support the application. Out of the incentives, we put on the first place stabilization clause, which actually guarantees that for the lifetime of the PSA, the legislation may only improve. I mean, anything that will change the legislation in the negative sense would not apply to the PSA. No retroactivity of negative law, unless it is improving the status of or the rights of investor, then it would apply. The investment compensation is also a possibility to rely on the investment treaties between investments jurisdiction and Ukraine, because it will still apply if anything would go wrong. And freedom of contract means that it is essentially that the parties themselves in the PSA are allowed to establish the legal regime, not relying, and the PSA law says actually in practically all respects, it is excluded from, I mean, the regime is excluded from the general law application, and many Ukrainian laws would have this clause that it applies except for the PSA that is regulated by its own clauses. Privileges extend to obtaining all governmental approvals in a very simplified way and in much shorter terms. Privileges in importation of goods, investors' rights of free disposal of product, both within Ukraine and exporting it outside of Ukraine without any restrictions, and linked to this right, currency and payment privileges, which are also, by and large, are exempt from any possible restrictions that existed in recent years because of the economic situation imposed by the National Bank of Ukraine, central bank, but not applicable to the PSAs. And of course, tax incentives. Under Ukrainian tax code, the PSA investor shall pay only 20% VAT, 18% income tax, and subsoil use fee. Payment of any other local tax, any mandatory charges that exist in Ukraine will not be applicable to PSA investor because everything is included by concept to product share. So this is just a very fast look into this form. Recently, the PSA as a legal form is discussed as a possibility for other sectors, not only energy sector. For example, agriculture is very flexible, and if the same incentives and privileges will extend to investor to land. Most recently, you probably have heard that Ukraine lifted the moratorium on the sale of agricultural land, but it does not extend to foreign investors yet. And when it would come, maybe through referendum in a couple of years, as the law says. So it is not that the title to land may be obtained immediately. However, PSA will give you a lot of possibilities in this regard, 50 years plus another 20, 50 years to use land with the idea to share the final product with the state on a good proportion.
Thank you.
We, as a firm, as I said, participated in practically all PSA developments. We drafted the law. We did a lot of practical work, drafting the PSAs, negotiating with investors, and may add any intricacies and details in case of interest. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Armen. I feel like we could organize another webinar only for lawyers, and we could sit and discuss different legislations for hours. But thank you for sharing with us all this information, and I really hope that our Ukrainian dolphin will go to the sea and swim very soon. We are looking forward for that. Now I think we could see the results of our polling. If Michael, you could share. Can you see that? Yeah, so most of the people see that unstable political situation in Ukraine is actually the main obstacle to increase cooperation within petroleum industry, which can be true in a way, but if you have any doubts about the situation in Ukraine, please contact us, and we could take you to the trip to Ukraine and arrange the meetings and to meet the key stakeholders so that you feel yourself more safe in Ukraine and what is happening. It is not that unstable as it looks like at the first sight. But now we are moving from petroleum to renewable energy sector. And I should say that we are very happy with the situation, at least as it was in 2019, as Norwegian companies had 18% of all foreign direct investments in Ukraine were coming from Norway. It should be also said that the FDI last year was quite low, only $2.5 billion for such a big country as Ukraine. So, but it means actually two things. First is that Ukraine is still undiscovered market for the investors, and there is a lot of potential. On the other hand, Norway became an important player in Ukraine, at least when it comes to the renewable sector. However, the recent developments on the market shows that what a couple of years ago used to be an attractive emerging market turns to be a tough place to be investor in when the government suddenly start talking about the retrospective changes in the tariffs. So what we want to hear is what is the status now and what we can expect in the market in the years to come, and whether electricity market, the new introduced electricity market last year, whether it works as expected. And we have with us Yaroslav Petrov from Asters to answer those questions. Yaroslav, welcome. I'm trying to share the screen, I suppose.
Yeah.
Can you also speak up so that we can make sure that we can hear you? Something happened with electricity, I suppose. Too much energy from solar and wind. Yes. While Yaroslav is trying to find the presentation, we could look at another polling. The question is the same, but now it comes to the renewable energy sector. If my colleague could share the polling so that audience could vote while we wait. And options are the same: lack of knowledge among Norwegian companies. I can remind you that we have, as of today, at least 3 Norwegian energy companies operating in Ukraine. And the audience still have time, about 1 minute to vote, while we see that Yaroslav is already ready to present. Right, Yaroslav? Yes, but I should also ask you to be as efficient as possible because we are running out of time.
Yeah, thank you very much. In my presentation, I wanted...
Can you speak up, please, because we can't hear you well.
Yeah, so in my presentation, I wanted to cover not only renewable energy, but also electricity market and
closer to the microphone.
Opportunities which arise in Ukraine. Can you hear me?
No.
We can hear you, but a little bit bad. If you could move closer to the microphone.
I think it will be better now. Yeah. So I will cover not only renewable energy issues, but also the electricity market reform. And so it is important to state that last year was very important for Ukraine because we have changed our electricity model. Before, it was based on the English model, wholesale market model, when there was only one company which was buying everything, and everyone, suppliers were buying this electricity from the wholesale market operator. And taking into consideration that Ukraine is following EU legislation as a member of energy community, so we were obliged to follow the third energy package and adopt a new law. And it was adopted actually in 2017, but implemented last year, and it was very speedy process, and a lot of regulatory changes happened, and a completely new mechanism started to operate in Ukraine. And basically, what happened? And you can see on the screen that this slide shows a comparison between the old system and the new system. And in the new system, you have familiar markets like in many European countries, day-ahead market, intraday market balancing. And so this system now is more transparent, and now the prices are based in this system on market elements, because in the past most of the prices were regulated, and now, and in the presentation further, I will show how the opening of the market actually impacted the prices. So also as a result of the reform, we had new participants in the electricity market. So we have new companies responsible for distribution, for supply to population, general suppliers. We have also new off-takers, guaranteed buyer who is responsible for buying electricity for renewables. And also we have a market operator who is responsible for functioning of these markets. So basically, additional entities which were established in a speedy way, but they're functioning quite well at the moment. And of right now, it is 1 year since the market is operating, and we can actually see some results. So in terms of prices, there is information just for you to understand where Ukraine stands in terms of prices at the day-ahead market. So for Ukraine, you can see two price tags. One is on the left is Burштyn Island. It is a part, it is island. We call it island because it is synchronized with the EU grid, and basically export of electricity is taking place from this island, which is located in the western Ukraine, and prices are higher. The generation there is based on CHP, and in Ukraine, the average price for the day-ahead market is 36 euros. So basically, you can see that more or less Ukrainian prices are in line with European prices, except Poland, where prices are higher. So with respect to the balancing market, the information is, you can see, for example, statistics for July, where we have low peak prices and high peak prices, and you can see the comparison between day-ahead market and intraday market and then balancing. And also, what is still kind of negative about functioning of our new electricity market. So at one point, it is based on economical parameters, and it is market-based, but still there are some regulatory barriers like price caps, with the help of which still regulator is trying to limit the prices, and you can see that in terms of price caps, it can be not less than 70% of the market price, and the maximum price cap cannot be higher than 115% of the actual prices in the intraday market. Also, in terms of auxiliary services market, it is also functioning. On this chart, you can see prices on the auxiliary services for different type of service, and also recent statistics. And in terms of kind of results of the first year, the positive is that all segments of the market are operating. The last market which was launched was auxiliary service market. It was launched this year. But the first market which was launched last year, it was distribution market, and then wholesale market. But now all the markets are operating and without any problems, and more companies are joining these markets. It is quite interesting statistics that at the day-ahead market, prices went down for 23% and 35% on the intraday market compared to the prices which were before 1st July 2019. So you can see that actually the introduction of market mechanisms helps to reduce prices. But there is also some explanation why it happened. We have quite high generation deficit this year due to COVID, and also due to warm winter. It was generation was high, but consumption was low, and this actually impacted on the prices quite significantly. And also another factor which impacted the day-ahead market prices is import of electricity from Belarus and Russia. Basically, due to actions of Russia, they actually destroyed the price on the market. The price they were selling electricity very low, in low prices, and this impacted our day-ahead market price significantly. And it had a very bad impact on the production by Ukrainian generation, and because they had to, their cost of production was higher than the price it was sold, and so volatility was very high. But in terms of number of participants on the market, you can see that 280 companies are now on the market. It is very good statistics. Also, another kind of result of the first year of operation of the market is payment prices in renewables, and it is a very big topic. And the reason for this is that with the launch of the new market, the mechanism for compensation for renewables also changed, and the largest part for compensation is based from the TSO tariff, and it appears that TSO tariff is not enough to pay everyone, and also there were some obligations, TSO obligations imposed on the off-taker. So all of these factors made problems with payment to renewables. I will cover this later. And but with respect to opportunities for foreign companies, we see more and more companies entering the Ukrainian market for power trading. For example, there are companies like Lithuanian companies opening offices and for purpose of buying electricity from Belarus, and also for trading in Ukraine. Also, it is important to bring investments into new generation capacities to improve grid stability, because with a lot of renewables, we have now imbalances in the system, and it should be improved with updates to the grids. And according to the 10-year network development plan developed by the TSO and approved by the regulator, in the coming years, we need to launch additional 2 gigawatts of maneuvering capacity. And it can be through the energy storages, or it can be through gas turbines. So it is also interesting business which can be used, and also there will be new opportunities when Ukraine integrates into NUCC, and the process is taking place as we speak, and there are developments in this area. For opportunities in renewables, I would not go kind of deep into what problems we have. I would look more about opportunities, and the opportunities are that so this market has been the highest growing market in Ukraine, and also in Europe, and according to different research statistics. So Ukraine was actually, for the last 2 years, it was the hot spot for development of renewables, and the regulatory regime and high tariffs invited several Norwegian companies, Asters Law and NUCC Solar, actually also made investments. But as of 1st of August, we have interactive cut of the tariff. Actually, partially it was caused by the payment deficit, and also attempts to stabilize the market. So we have reduced tariffs now, and this may cause investment arbitrations against Ukraine, but we are here looking into the future. As to the future, I see that there are opportunities for new projects to participate in auctions, and this will be the new mechanism which will work in Ukraine. Also, due to recent legislative changes, it is in the next months we may see also some initiatives to launch the contracts for different markets. So it will be also opportunity. But with respect to auctions, they were supposed to start in 2019, but due to the crisis with feed-in tariff, it didn't take place. And I think that auctions most likely will take place in 2020 or next year. And in terms of capacity, which will be subject to auctions, it is wind projects above 5 megawatt and solar projects above 1 megawatt. The mechanism will be supported for 20 years, and but right now it is difficult to say how much will be allocated for auctions. So
Yaroslav, 30 seconds max.
I'm done. Yeah, so I would be glad to answer your questions.
Perfect timing. Thank you. We have some questions coming from the audience. I see the question regarding oil and gas sector, but before that, we would like to see the results of the polling regarding renewables. Okay, so most of the people, or 50-50, thinks that lack of financial instruments to run business in Ukraine and unstable political situations are the main obstacles to develop the renewable sector cooperation between Ukraine and Norway. Of course, when there are so many players entering the market, the competition to get the financial instruments will be higher. So it's not that strange to see. But basically what you, Yaroslav, says is that the technology and innovation is needed to move the market further, because it's changing from what we got used to from the recent years. And now when I follow the energy news in Ukraine, more and more discussion about the hydrogen is coming into market, and we hope that this will also open for new opportunities for cooperation between Ukraine and Norway. And now I know that there is a national strategy on the development in Ukraine. Norway has recently developed its national strategy for hydrogen, and today we have with us Torkjell Kleppo Grøndalen from Schjødt, who can tell us more about it and whether hydrogen can bring new energy to business relations between Ukraine and Norway.
Thank you. I'm just gonna share my screen here. Thank you for the opportunity to give a short status of the Norwegian strategy of use of hydrogen. I know that we are running out of time, so I will try to be quite brief. Towards a carbon neutral society, hydrogen will play an important role as an energy carrier. As stated, the Norwegian government, they announced its strategy on use of hydrogen in the beginning of June this year. And they stated that this will form the basis for their work with regard to hydrogen. We have to say that this strategy is quite general, with really no concrete new actions. So it has met some criticism in the market and among the players. Just a short background for this strategy, that today about 90% of the hydrogen used in Europe is produced from natural gas with no carbon capture and storage, meaning that the CO2 is emitted to the air. Going to a carbon neutral society, production of so-called clean hydrogen is a necessity. Either you can produce hydrogen by electrolysis with clean power, for example, hydrogen power, wind or solar, or from natural gas with carbon capture and storage, CCS. This strategy is divided into three main topics. The first topic is what they call safe use and production of hydrogen with limited emissions. One important element that the state and that the government have emphasized, they want to increase the number of demo plants. As you all know, this hydrogen technology is an emerging technology, so we need to prove the technology. And one example of this in Norway, that the Enova, which is a state entity for state support, announced this summer a state grant of about 7 million kroner to a demo production plant at Kolsnes. And this plant will produce hydrogen from natural gas with integrated CCS. The strategy also emphasized that currently the production cost for hydrogen is lower from natural gas than by electrolysis. Therefore, carbon capture and storage is essential in order to achieve the goal of use of hydrogen in Norway. And in connection with this, we have to mention a CCS project going on in Norway right now, the so-called Northern Lights. The Northern Lights project is a project for transportation and storage. So it's not a capture project, it's a transportation and storage. This project is run by Equinor, Shell and Total. However, major state support is necessary. So you foresee a state support in amount of 80–90% of the capex and 80–90% of the opex. The project is that you're going to transport CO2 with vessels from different emission sources. And these sources can be in Norway, Sweden, UK, or at the continent. And these vessels will transport the CO2 to an onshore terminal at the western part of Norway. It's planned at Kolsnes. The companies, Equinor, Shell and Total, made their investment decision this spring. And now this project is at the test desk of the government. And they plan to decide whether to invest in this or not during this fall or early 2021. And then again, they will store the subsea. And this is also an important element of hydrogen, because, for example, this plant I mentioned, they plan to establish a plant at Kolsnes, where then the CCS will be stored through this Northern Light project. The second element of this hydrogen strategy is use of hydrogen in Norway. Today in Norway, the most of the hydrogen is used in production of methanol and ammonia, so for industrial purposes. And the very limited use of hydrogen in transport sector, there are some few filling stations, but not only a few of them. Going forward, the government foresee three main main use of hydrogen. Firstly, in the maritime sector as a fuel for vessels. And here, Norway has an ambition to be the pioneer within hydrogen technology. They also foresee a market in the heavy transport and transport sector, and lastly, industrial use. Norway has already some players in this market. We can mention Nel, which is a producer of hydrogen through their technology of electrolyzers and also filling equipment. We have a couple of companies that focus on storage and transportation, and we have another company that has a different technology. We produce hydrogen based on natural gas with integrated carbon capture and storage. That was the second element of this strategy, and the last element that the government emphasized is international cooperation. In order to achieve the goal, it is important that it's necessary to have a national cooperation and to take part of that. And in relation to that, I may also mention the EU's hydrogen strategy that was announced this summer in July. Because analysis indicates that hydrogen will cover about 24% of the world's energy demand in 2050. That's a really high number. And that amounts to a sale about 630 billion. So this will be most likely a very, very large market. However, large investments are necessary. And towards 2030, the planned investments within the EU in connection with hydrogen, it will be amount to about 460 billion euros. And the plan to increase the production in the first 4 years, now the plan to increase the production to about 1 million tons hydrogen per year, up to 10 million tons per year in 2025 to 2030. However, EU, they state that they will prioritize hydrogen from electrolysis with wind and solar power instead of hydrogen from natural gas. But they state that hydrogen from natural gas will play a role in the transition period. And here, Norway and maybe also Ukraine will play a role in this. Yeah, this was a short the Norwegian hydrogen strategy in 5 minutes or so. Many thanks.
Yes, thank you. We could just combining your presentation and what Jaroslav said before, it looks like at least this year Ukraine could be a very good market for producing electrolyzers, since we had the deficit of green energy, and Ukraine even had to slow down several stately owned nuclear plants because we had agreement to buy all the electricity produced by solar and wind. So there is no doubt that Ukraine should look into hydrogen, and we hope that there are possibilities in that market. We have several questions, but we have no time, so we will. You are welcome to send us the question you have in written, and we will proceed it with our partners in Asters and Schjødt. But at least one question I would like to take, and this I think can go to Christian. What are the key prerequisites for Norwegian companies to enter Ukrainian petroleum market? If you would say just in very short, what should be in place in Ukraine so that your clients could go and work in Ukraine?
The first issue will always be prospectivity. So I think that's the main issue. Let the geologists get access to data, available data, and examine prospectivity. Mm-hmm. If the prospectivity is there, generally you also get interest. So I think Norwegian players, there could be Norwegian
sort of specialized oil companies that are not looking so much for Norway, which is sort of for the very big players, or has been for the very big players, but more specialized Norwegian oil companies and international companies that would sort of be interested in going into, for example, PSA competitions. They would have views certainly on the terms, competitive terms, if they first get access to data so they can examine prospectivity.
I think we could take that message to State Geology Service in Ukraine, and we'll definitely keep in touch both with you and Asters. And I think on that positive note, we can conclude that we are finishing our webinar, this time digitally, but hopefully that in the nearest future we will have possibility to run this something similar offline in Oslo as we originally planned. But anyway, thank you both, Asters and Schjødt, and the audience for participating and coming with their question. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.